So this is lesson 3, and lesson 3 is entitled, Resentment is Self-Inflicted Injury. Anytime you feel aggression or vengeance or hatred or unkindness towards anyone, that you or we are the ones who possess those emotions. So when I'm angry, I'm actually the one who suffers. When I'm resentful, I'm really the one who suffers the most. And a lot of us aren't fully aware of how much we suffer from our own resentment. And so in lesson 3, we want to bring awareness to how much we are inflicting pain upon ourselves by our own resentment. Nelson Mandela once said that resentment is like drinking poison and thinking the other person will die. So we're actually obviously destroying ourselves. But the resentment is there, in a sense, to try to punish or hurt the other person, or to justify our innocence, or to point out what's wrong or bad or abusive about that person. And in doing so, we harm ourselves. Oftentimes, when we're upset, we think about the person who upsets us. And thinking about that person just upsets us even more. So we're inflicting injury upon ourselves. And our friends will say something like, you should just drop it, just let it go. Because they can see very clearly that you're harming yourself. And from their perspective, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you want to do that? Because you're getting nothing from it but distress. Resentment is a constant form of stress. So what psychologists have studied and discovered is that when you hold on to resentment, it's constant, as opposed to just becoming upset. Let's say you do something that upsets me. 5 minutes later I'm fine, an hour later I'm fine, the next day I'm fine, 2 days later I'm fine. But resentment, you're not fine. You're not fine in 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, next week, next month, next year. It can go on for years. It could go on for your whole life. So when you hold on to resentment, it's that stressful event that you weren't able to let go of, and it stays with you, and it stresses you out, although you may not realize it's stressing you out, because you're not so consciously aware of what's going on internally, because you've suppressed it. We tend to suppress it and pretend it's not as bad as it is. But what's actually happening is the stress of that resentment is working on a very subtle level, and it's actually wearing out our immune system, and it's wearing us out emotionally, and it's wearing us out spiritually. So it's not just physical stress, it's emotional stress, and it's spiritual stress. It's extremely unhealthy. If you actually realized how unhealthy resentment is, you would give it up in a second. And most people don't realize how much damage they're doing to themselves. So the idea of this section is to get a glimpse of how damaging it is, because when you understand you're damaging yourself, then it's likely you're going to want to work on your resentment issues, because you realize that it's really a bad thing to hold on to. There is research out today showing the correlation between cancer and resentment. The reason being is that cancer often is caused by a deficient immune system. So stress weakens the immune system. So when your immune system is weak, you can't fight off the cancer. You can't fight off many diseases. So stress is very bad for the health, and resentment is a constant, subtle form of stress. So you can understand how bad it is. Resentment is self-imprisonment. There's a saying that when you forgive, you let the prisoner free, and then you realize who was the prisoner. You realize the prisoner was you. So in our workshops, we asked attendants or participants, we asked them, imagine what your resentment feels like. Get a emotional grip and make an analogy. And we're also asking you to do that in this workshop. And so they do it, and a lot of people come up with this analogy. I'm in jail, I lock the door, I have the key, and I don't get out. So when we hold on to resentment, we're really imprisoning ourselves with our own resentment. And as we discussed earlier, resentment's a choice. You can very easily choose to give it up, but somehow or other, we don't choose to give it up, we choose to hold on to it. And so basically what we're doing is holding on to the key, but we're not using it. We're not unlocking the door. We've used the key to lock the door, and now we're imprisoned by it. So even though somebody hurts you, even though someone abuses you, even though someone harms you, you're not bound by resentment. You don't have to be resentful. You have a choice. You can let it go. You can respond in a kinder way, not a tit-for-tat way. They hurt me, I'll hurt them. You don't have to do that. You might think you have to, but you don't. So that's why we say resentment is self-imprisonment. Because you don't have to hold on to resentment, but if you do, you imprison yourself by your own anger, by your own vengeance, by your own hatred. And the result is, as we said, you stress yourself out emotionally, physically, and mentally, and spiritually. Carrying your potatoes of hatred. So you see here in this slide, there's potatoes, and they have different names of people on the potatoes. So this is actually a true story of a teacher who wanted to teach her students about what it's like to carry anger and hatred in your heart. So she said, tonight when you go home, I want you to think of every person you hate. And make a list of all those people. Write their names down. And then, for the number of people you have, go and pick out that many potatoes, or go buy that many potatoes. You have 5 people you hate, you need 5 potatoes. And on each potato, I want you to write their name. So the students had no idea what was going on. So they all thought of the people they hate. They wrote their names on potatoes, and they brought their potatoes. Some people had 1 potato, some 5, some 10, some 20. Some people had 50 potatoes. They hated a lot of people. And so she told them, bring them in a bag. So they all brought their bags, and not knowing what the teacher was going to say. And then the teacher dropped a bomb on them, and the teacher said, for the next week, your assignment is to carry this bag with you wherever you go. And you have to carry it 24 hours a day. That means you have to sleep with it, you have to eat with it, you have to be holding on to it when you're bathing, during gym, whatever you're doing, you have to hold on to potatoes. And after a few days, potatoes started to smell because they got wet, because they have to bathe with them. And then they had to eat with smelly potatoes, sleep with smelly potatoes. And for those kids who had like 20 or 30 potatoes, that was kind of heavy. It's kind of a heavy burden to carry around. And so every day they'd come back to class and they'd say, teacher, why are we doing this? And she said, I'll tell you at the end of the week. And they'd say, teacher, do we have to hold on to these potatoes? Can't we just let them down because they're heavy and they bother us? Do we have to sleep with them? Do we have to eat with them? Do we have to bathe with them? And she said, yes, yes, yes. You won't get the lesson unless you do this. So she forced them to do this. Then on Friday, they came back with the potatoes, and she said, okay, now you can drop your potatoes. And then she told them the moral of the story, which you might guess. She said, this is what it's like to hold on to hatred for someone. This is what it's like to hold on to resentment. You carry the weight and the toxicity of that hatred wherever you go 24 hours a day. And the more you hold on to it, the heavier it gets. Just like if I put my hand out and you put 1 pound of fruit in my hand, it's very easy for me to hold. But after an hour, it starts feeling extremely heavy. Although it's 1 pound, it feels like about 10 or 15. And after a while, I can't even hold it, even though it's 1 pound. So when you hold on to resentment, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, it becomes more and more and more burdensome. It becomes so burdensome and so toxic, you don't even know it anymore. You're just so used to living that way and being that way, you have no idea how burdensome it is. So this teacher wanted to give the students a real life lesson, and it was a fantastic lesson because they had to carry the burden of their own hatred. And it's exactly what it's like when we carry that burden in our heart. Very important lesson. Getting angry is actually punishing yourself with the mistakes of others. Just like someone ever do something you don't like, and you say, I hate when people do that. All right, who just got punished? That person or you? You just punish yourself. I can't stand it when people do this. All right, who's getting punished? That person or you? So we're punishing ourselves by the mistakes of others. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that interesting? How we punish ourselves? How much of an enemy we are to ourselves? We should be our own well-wisher. We should love ourselves. We should be compassionate to ourselves. We should be kind to ourselves. Shouldn't we? But every time we get upset, annoyed, disturbed by the actions of others, what are we really doing? We're allowing their behavior to be a punishment to us. And who's allowing it? We are. We're doing it. A lot of times people ask me, what do you think of so-and-so? And they're talking about so-and-so is really doing something bad. And normally I say, I don't think about so-and-so. Because why do I want to think about so-and-so? Because if I think about so-and-so, I'm just going to get upset. Because so-and-so does upsetting things. And when you think about people who do upsetting things, how do you feel? There was one spiritual teacher, he was giving a talk to maybe 1,000 people. And it was during the time of the O.J. Simpson trial. I don't know if you're all aware of it or remember it, but O.J. Simpson was on trial for murder, and he's a big sports star. And so it was really a dramatic trial. And all of America was absorbed in the O.J. Simpson trial. And this spiritual teacher at the beginning of his talk, but the O.J. Simpson trial was on television during his talk, and he said, I beg you, don't watch this trial because it is just polluting your mind. It's absorbing your consciousness in something extremely negative. And all these tabloids about what the stars are doing, all the bad things they're doing, we love to meditate on the mistakes of others. Interesting, isn't it? Like there's something wrong with us, I think. And so when someone does something we don't like, we like to think about it. We like to talk about it. We dwell on it. And all we're doing is punishing ourselves with the mistakes of others. I don't want to say we're crazy, but I'll say it anyway. We're crazy. We do crazy things to harm ourselves. We don't need to do them, and we do them. If we stop being crazy, I think we'll be happier. So the next slide, you will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger. This was a statement of Lord Buddha. You won't be punished for your anger. You know, you can get angry. The world's not going to fall on you, on your head. A thunderbolt's not going to come out of the sky and destroy you. We get angry all the time. We're not punished because we get angry. We're punished by our anger. We punish ourselves by our anger. Long ago, I was managing a project, and I was getting very, very frustrated because the people that were working on the project, number one, English wasn't their first language, so they were always misunderstanding me. And they weren't really qualified fully for the work we had to do. So if you work with people who aren't fully qualified to do the work and they don't even understand your language that well, it's very frustrating. And I was getting very, very angry all the time. And then at one point I realized what Lord Buddha said, that I was punishing myself by my anger, that I didn't have to get angry. I could just understand that their capabilities didn't equal the job description, so we're just going to have to go with the flow and just get it done as best we can. And I don't want to have this horrible relationship with everyone where I hate everybody and everybody hates me, because what's the point? Because we're doing spiritual work, and spiritual work is about working together, showing affection, being kind, and now there's just so much friction. Didn't make any sense. So this all kind of hit me at one point, and I made a decision. I said to myself, I don't want to get angry anymore because it just doesn't make sense. There's no point to it. I'm miserable, they're miserable, and we're a spiritual organization, and this just doesn't make sense. And when I made that decision, something amazing happened. From that point on, I didn't get angry. They'd make their mistakes. I'd say, could you go out and buy 4 D batteries? You know the D batteries? They're like this size. And they would come back with 40 batteries. Not 4D batteries, but 40 batteries, 40A batteries. And when they would do that, I would simply laugh and say, oh, I meant 4D batteries, not 4T batteries. And then we could laugh. Everything was okay. Because I made a decision not to get angry. You can make a decision. It's amazing. You can make a decision not to get angry. You can make a decision not to be resentful or vengeful. You can make a decision to let go of your resentment. Isn't that amazing? You could actually do that. You can actually stop punishing yourself. Isn't that good news? You don't have to punish yourself. Nobody's forcing you. We're doing it of our own volition because something's wrong with us. We don't understand what we're doing. We're making our lives miserable. Because someone else does something we don't like, we have to become miserable? No. What do you think about so-and-so and what they're doing? I don't think about them. I'd rather not think about them. I'd rather think about people who inspire me rather than people who disturb me. Victor or victim. So, victim we know. What does victim mean? Victim means I'm helpless, can't do anything. And what does victor mean? Victor is it's also a name of someone. Victor means solution-oriented. Okay, here's a situation, things aren't working out. What can we do to solve it? When you go into victim mode, you're paralyzed because you can't think of anything to do. When you go into victor mode, you think of how to get around the situation. So, being forgiving is victor consciousness. You've been hurt, but you don't dwell in victim mode. Oh, I'm so unfortunate, I'm so miserable, I'm so unhappy, I've been so mistreated, it's not fair. You don't go that way. You just think, all right, what am I to learn? How do we move forward? How can I still be kind and compassionate even though I wasn't treated well? That's victor consciousness. You deal with the situation, you come out better. Even though bad things happen, you come out better. But in victim consciousness, when bad things happen, you come out worse. You complain. It's not my fault, it's all their fault. And if you complain it's all their fault, then you can't do anything. But when you're in victor consciousness, you think, what can I do? What's in my power to do? How can I make this situation better? I can't change what happened. The past is what it is. Forgiveness means to give up all hope for a better past. That's just what happened. I can go forward with a different future even though I can't change the past. I can go forward. I can create a better future. Even though the past wasn't the way I want it to be, the future, I can make it the way I want it to be. That's the idea of being a victor rather than a victim. When we won't forgive, it's difficult to cooperate. Have you ever heard the saying, if you don't want to forgive, don't get married? And you could expand that. If you don't want to have a good relationship, make sure you don't forgive. Because I guarantee you, if you don't forgive, you'll have a bad relationship. So when we're working in groups, the most important thing for working in groups is to be sensitive to how other people feel, to be sensitive to other people's needs. This is statistical research. The best team players are the most sensitive people, sensitive to how other people feel. Unless we're able to forgive, we're not going to have highly efficient cooperative teams. We're just not going to be able to work well together, because when you hold a grudge towards someone, you can't work with them. Can you? No, you can't. It just... You know, there's research that if I don't like you, but I treat you well, you will feel like I don't like you. Even though I'm treating you well, you will feel what's going on inside of me. You won't feel how I'm acting. I could be very nice to you. I could give you presents. I could honor you. I could appreciate you. I could praise you. But if inside I don't like you, you will see all my good behavior as ill behavior, because you will feel what I feel. So if we have resentment towards another person, even if we act nicely, kindly, and so forth, they're not going to feel that we're loving and kind and compassionate, even though we're acting that way. They're going to feel what we feel inside. So if you want highly efficient, functioning teams, forgiveness is an essential character for all the people on the team, because you have to root out, neutralize all toxicity between you. Otherwise, your team is going to be less efficient, somewhat dysfunctional. Compassion neutralizes anger, envy, and hatred. So what I've discovered through teaching forgiveness is that one of the main reasons we don't forgive is our heart is hard. We just don't want to let compassion into our heart because the person hurt us so deeply. We feel like they don't really deserve to be forgiven. You know, what they've done is so bad, they really don't deserve to be forgiven. So it's sometimes really difficult for us to just let it go. What to speak of let it go? To be kind towards them. And that's the definition of forgiveness. To give somebody behavior that they don't deserve and not give them the behavior they do deserve. They mistreated you, they deserve to be mistreated, but you're kind upon them, you're compassionate upon them, and they don't even deserve it. So, it was said by a great teacher, great writer, Eric Hoffer, compassion is the antitoxin of the soul. The antitoxin of the soul. What did he mean? He meant that when you have compassion, it neutralizes all negative emotions. It neutralizes your anger, your envy, your jealousy, your resentment. So that's my personal discovery in teaching forgiveness and working on myself. when a person finally comes to a level where their heart starts to soften, and they start to feel some compassion for the person who hurt them, start to feel some compassion for their struggles, for their difficulties, starting to understand why they do what they do, why they did what they did, the heart starts to soften. And when the heart softens, you naturally become free from your resentment. You naturally become forgiving. It's just, you don't even, it's not happening here, it's happening here. When you forgive, it comes out of your heart. The resentment, it just flows out. You're not even always conscious of it. It goes, and you don't know what happened to it. It's gone. What happened is what you became compassionate. Your heart opened. It's like your heart is closed, and it opens. And when it opens, you turn it, the resentment just falls out. So that's actually what happens when you forgive. Your heart softens. Or when you forgive in the highest sense, in the truest sense, your heart softens. You develop compassion for the trials, tribulations, and suffering of another person. That's what compassion means. You put yourself in their shoes. Could I have done what they did if I was in their situation? Could I have done what they did if I had their life circumstances? Of course I could have. Am I not going to be kind and merciful? If I was hurt and I asked for your forgiveness, I'd want you to be merciful. Am I not going to be merciful? Am I going to ask for justice for them, but when I do something wrong, ask for mercy for myself? That's a paradox. Doesn't make sense. In order to forgive, we are challenged to come to a higher level of spiritual consciousness. The great thing about being hurt is it gives you an opportunity to forgive. So if you see it that way, to be hurt in a sense is good, because if you learn how to forgive, you're forced to come to an extremely high level of consciousness. A level of consciousness that perhaps you wouldn't have come to if you weren't hurt. And when you experience forgiveness, one of the things you realize is that nobody can harm you anymore, because now you're proactively forgiving. You're always ready to forgive, so nobody can hurt you, nobody can upset you, because you don't want to live in that lower realm of resentment. You want to live in that world of compassion. So, if somebody hurt you, just feel that actually, I'm fortunate. There's a story of an angel came to a little boy, and he's told the boy, he said, you have all divine qualities. In this life, what quality do you want to learn? The boy said, I want to learn forgiveness. So the angel said, okay, I'm going to come back in a new body, in a new incarnation, as your enemy. And the boy said, why would you come back as my enemy? He said, well, if you want to learn to forgive, you need an enemy. So I'll come back as your enemy, and then you can learn to forgive me. So, in a sense, enemies are really our teachers, because they give us an opportunity to forgive. Unless there's someone that disturbs us, how can we learn forgiveness? How can we learn tolerance? How can we learn kindness and compassion? So, if you look at it that way, you'll see it more as an opportunity than a frustration. Instead of saying, I just don't know how I can forgive, you'll start to say, this is really a good opportunity to learn how to forgive. And as you learn how to forgive, you realize forgiving is probably one of the best teachings you could ever learn in your life. It's one of the most transformational teachings, because it deals with so many aspects of our psyche and so many aspects of spirituality. It's so beneficial. So we have an exercise for you. As I said, we're going to ask you to get in touch with your resentment by allowing yourself to feel your pain. So, we'd like you to feel your resentment. Just, think of the issue and allow yourself to feel the pain. Do you feel it in your stomach, your chest, your shoulders, your head, your throat, your body, whole body? Do you feel it around like the whole universe is surrounding you? And then we'd like you to come up with an analogy. Like one lady gave an analogy. She said, my resentment is like I'm going into labor, excruciating pain, but I won't let the baby come out. What an amazing analogy. Somebody said, my resentment is like every person that I hate, I take an arrow and I stick myself with it. Boom, boom, boom. So we want you to think of analogies. What is it like? Like a prison. I've locked the door in the prison. Just feel it. Feel it deeply. Feel your resentment. It's very important to feel it, because as you feel it, you realize how bad it feels. You realize what you're carrying around. That's the purpose of this exercise, to allow yourself to feel what you're carrying around.